This week on Cross First News. The growing exodus. 261 Georgia churches leave the Methodist Church. What's going on? The Israel-Hamas pause? 4 days of ceasefire. What's happened? And how did this all come to be? A high school football coach baptizes 20 students and gets fired for it. What took place? Who was involved? And what are my feelings about this? And lastly, my commentary. Are you finished changing? Let's find out. What did I learn this week that has me, wanting to share it with you guys? Stay tuned for Cross First News. This week in U.S. news, the growing exodus. 261 Georgia churches leave the Methodist Church. Let me ask you this. If your church started accepting things that were generally accepted in culture, right? What would you do? And how would you react? How would your pastor or church leadership react? Well, guess what? This week, more than 261 congregations of the United Methodist Church cut ties with the UMC. Why? Because the UMC forbids marriage and ordination of practicing homosexuals. Okay, this is what they're supposed to do. Well, guess what? There were clergy members allowing this to happen. And on top of that, there were church members going along with it. So pretty much what was going on, the UMC was allowing marriage and ordination of practicing homosexuals. The North Georgia Conference of the denomination allowed more than 261 congregations to leave during a special session that ratified the disaffiliation request. So the North Georgia Conference is 700 churches, which means 261 left. That pretty much comes down to a third of the North Georgia Conference that has disassociated from the United Methodist Church. This is after 186 congregations sued the North Georgia Conference to have their disaffiliation requests heard in April of this year. On top of that, this isn't the only congregation to leave. Since 2019, some more than 7,285 congregations have split from the United Methodist Church, and 5,000 of those took place in the year 2023, this year. So where are they all going, you may ask? Well, since May of this year, 3,000 of the congregations have gone to the Global Methodist Church. This new Methodist Church congregation or denomination is focused on biblical beliefs, and they're not straying away from what biblical principles teach. You know, speaking of straying away, the Lord had this quote brought to my attention from G.K. Chesterton, and it reads like this: "Unless a man becomes the enemy of an evil, he will not even become its slave, but rather its champion." That's G.K. Chesterton. So what's my point? It says in Hebrews 3:12, "Take care, brothers, lest there be any of you who have unbelieving hearts leading you to fall away from the living God." You know, folks, if you're wondering, out of 700, 261 is a third. So if you're trying to figure out how much that is percentage-wise, that's approximately 37,000. That means 37%. So that means 37% of the congregation made the choice to leave. So that leaves more than 62% remaining in the United Methodist congregation, pretty much, of North Georgia. Folks, for me, that is somewhat troubling. You know, the fact that the Bible talks about there's going to be a falling away, and for you to see it? Now, granted, this is not a huge occurrence, right? It's not a big falling away, but it's a sample of what Hebrews is talking about. And so at the end of the day, I think one thing we need to get from this is that there will be a falling away. The second thing we need to learn from this is that God will make a way, right? And I believe the way that God made for these Methodist congregations is the Global Methodist Church. You know, at the end of the day, all we can do is pray that this new denomination will continue with the gospel and pick up where the United Methodist Church is in essence leaving off. And let's pray for those who are still in the UMC that they will just have an awakening and come back to biblical Christian views. Amen. So, international news. Israel-Hamas pause. 4 days of ceasefire. The Israel-Hamas pause. 4 days of ceasefire. Well, with more than 1.7 million estimated to have been displaced in Gaza, with death and heartache on both sides of this war, along with protests all around the world for Israel and Palestine, as well as a humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza, perhaps the time has come for a pause in the conflict, right? A 4-day pause. You know, leading up to this 4-day pause, Israel's IDF was still performing airstrikes in the Palestinian enclave on their continued search for Hamas. While you might think this pause in conflict is occurring, and that it's a sign that Israel may be slowing or changing its mind concerning everything going on in the war, think again. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has stressed that the mission to eliminate Hamas and free all those taken on October 7th will continue in full force. But since the deal was struck on Wednesday, November 22nd, and as of this broadcast, what has been the outcome for day one of this Israel-Hamas pause? On Friday, November 24th, the first group of hostages were handed over. What we know is there were 13 Israeli civilians freed, along with 11 foreign nationals. The 13 all range in ages from 2 years old to 85. All are said to be doing well. On the foreign nationals side, the 11 foreign nationals released represent the nations of the Philippines, that's 10, and then you have Thailand, which is 1. Now, among those who were also released was a citizen from Poland. But in the end, all those of the 12 released, right, are said to be doing well, and many have spoken to family and friends back in their home countries. You know, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, had these words to say about the ceasefire. We just completed the return of the first of our hostages, children, their mothers, and additional women. But I emphasize to you, the families, and to you, citizens of Israel, we are committed to returning all the hostages. And that's the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So what's my point? You know, with mounting pressure coming from nations around the world, and some even wishing that Israel be charged with war crimes, this ceasefire is much needed for the holiday season, right? So here in the States, but I think there needs to be a pause now more than ever, right? I've heard that this pause is what Hamas may need to recharge and re-strengthen itself for the second phase of this war. And I've even heard nations trying to get Israel to be charged with war crimes. First off, Israel can't be charged with war crimes, right? Only people can be charged with war crimes. And second, charging somebody with war crimes takes years. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to figure out, how was it explained? It's not what was done, it's why it was done, right? So I don't necessarily see that happening. With Hamas recharging, do I see Hamas recharging to attack Israel? Well, they've already found out that their headquarters was in Al-Shifa Hospital. So at the end of the day, do I think Hamas is going to come back with a vengeance? It's tough to say. I think the fury of Israel is far greater than the fury that Hamas could ever try to throw at the Israeli nation. And so at the end of the day, all we can do is see what happens with this pause, because Israel isn't done. Is Hamas finished? They're not, because it's believed that Hamas went south with everybody who was fleeing. So are they going to try to regroup and try something else? I don't know. But when it comes to Israel, they don't mess around, boy. Life. Well, high school football coach baptizes 20 students and gets fired. In Tattnall County, that's in Georgia, a head football coach has been fired. The reason why he has been fired was said by the school district to be because of an unspecified incident that took place in early November. But others are saying it's because of something bigger that drew controversy. What brought controversy, you may ask? Well, the former head coach brought in a pastor and led 20 students to be baptized. Really? Isaac Farrell, who is the former head coach of Tattnall County High School, brought in Pastor Gary Few and led 20 football players after practice to get baptized. Now, what's interesting is this sounds like it's harmless, right? I mean, you pray at the flagpole, it's voluntary, right? You bring your Bible to school, it's voluntary, right? Well, the way this story is currently shaping up, it seems like, what is it like, what's wrong with this? It's voluntary, right? Well, not to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The Freedom from Religion Foundation didn't like the baptism ceremony and wrote a letter to Tattnall County Superintendent Kristen Waters, asking for the school to ensure that this school-sponsored religious coercion ends immediately. They also made the argument that the head coach was abusing his position, and in the end, the foundation got what they wanted. Well, sort of. So, how do parents feel about this? Well, one of the parents of the players had this to say. It was so sweet because you see the boys and they look like they wanted it. You know, like everyone looked excited from the ones I was able to see. And that's Latifia Johnson, who's a parent of one of the players that's been baptized. She went on to say that the coach's faith made him a positive role model to the players on the team, and that she was proud of her son because of the decision he made to get baptized, which he made the decision on his own. What's my point? My point is this. Wow, this is quite a story, to do what you feel God calling you to do, right? To lead lives to the Lord and then to ultimately have your job taken away from you. Now, his job as a head coach is gone, but he's still a teacher with the county. Let's get that squared away. But it's clear to see he had a passion for football and a passion for souls. But at the end of the day, it's one of those decisions where I'm pretty sure former head coach Isaac, is looking at what he's done, and I'm pretty sure Satan is tempting him. All right? Satan is probably telling him, you shouldn't have stepped out. They could have gotten saved or baptized in church. You could have still had your job. But honest to goodness, folks, I have to give the former head coach a round of applause. It's not easy stepping out and going and doing something God has called you to do in what could be considered a hostile environment. So at the end of the day, I think the coach did the right thing. There's always going to be people against you. There's always going to be. There's always going to be people who don't like you. There's always going to be people who want to see God's kingdom fail. Right? There's God's kingdom and there's Satan's empire. So for what it's worth, hopefully this coach doesn't regret what he did. Because folks, I don't regret hearing his testimony. And I hope and pray that if I was ever called out to do something, which I have been done in the past, that I continue to step up for God and continue to do it. All right, folks. So lastly, my commentary. It seems like we've been inundated with change, right? And if it's one thing we've learned this week from this broadcast, change is inevitable. When I was in the Army, they had a saying. The only thing constant in life is change. You know what? It's true. Churches having to leave the United Methodist for Global Methodist Church. Israel having to pause. A coach having to take a bold step that he could never have imagined would have caused him to lose his job. But what if you had to make a bold step? What if that bold step was to reach the next generation? Could you do it? Okay, so it's time to get a little personal. When I was growing up, I would go to the mall, right? We all would. And I would end up seeing a sporting goods store called Eddie Bauer. I enjoyed going into this store because I would look at all the little knickknacks and doodads in there for camping. Never been camping, never plan on doing it. Unless you count my time in the Army out in the field. Okay, maybe that counts as well. Well, I remember one time I saw in there, I saw a sardine can full of like tons of different things on the inside. And I thought it was kind of incredible, right? So from that point on, it always seemed like Eddie Bauer was always an interesting place to go for me. Now, one thing I always loved from a creative standpoint, okay, emphasis on that, was Eddie Bauer's logo. Eddie Bauer has always had a script logo. And little did I know, Eddie Bauer's logo goes all the way back to when it was founded. Eddie Bauer was founded in 1920, which made 2020 its 100th anniversary. Well, folks, guess what? I just learned that after more than 103 years of using their script logo, they've officially said goodbye to it. Eddie Bauer earlier this year got a brand new logo, and I was surprised to actually find out why. It makes sense. I'll give them that. The reason why they changed it, right? So you're probably wondering, why did they change it? Well, the reason why they changed it was because they wanted to reach the next generation. Okay. Well, it's easy to sit back, folks, and say that. It's easy to say you want to reach the next generation and make more edgier marketing, or put people in the marketing that looks like them and relates to them, or change the way you look and your appeal. But they thought about something that most of us didn't even think about. Did you know in most schools today they don't teach cursive writing, right? So naturally, when you have a cursive logo, do you think the next generation, Gen Z, right, is going to understand what it says? Well, survey says no, it won't. That's why Eddie Bauer made their logo non-cursive. And I have to say, it looks really good from a creative standpoint. And also, it's actually pretty clever from a, from just a general human-to-human standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. So what's my point? You know, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Benjamin Franklin. And I was thinking about something that he said that I actually learned at church. He said this: when you're finished changing, you're finished. Just like you read that quote from Ben Franklin, it's true. When you're finished changing, you're finished. I know it's been that way in my life, as well as with M.King Media, right? God has always called me forward. So here's where I'm going with this. This is where I'm going with this for you. If God is calling you to step out and do something, if he's calling you to get away from a job or to step out and say something about some injustice, do it. You never know what God has on the other side of what you're doing. Maybe someone's going to get saved. Maybe someone is going to be changed. Or maybe someone is just going to step back and think about what they're doing a little bit differently. Here's my point. God is going to call you to do things, and you're going to get hurt. But you have to remember beyond a shadow of a doubt, okay? The same God that called you into the hurt is the same God that can bring you out of the hurt and bring you out with healing. Why? How? Because he's a healing God, isn't he? Folks, on behalf of all of us here from this Creative Christian Media Organization, I'm M.King. Thank you for joining us for Cross First News for this week, and I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you'll share it. I'll see you next time.